live.
Awesome. Welcome to Black Dialogues. Our vision statement is that the Black Dialogue is a space by Black people for Black people to heal from the wounds of colonialism, white supremacy, and unify the Black diaspora to take action and support existing Pan African movements. We do this by providing a space to learn about the global Black freedom struggle, have challenging and necessary conversations to learn about our intersecting identities, and build an inclusive community, and all while connecting with opportunities and organizations locally and abroad to take action. So, welcome everybody. We're going to do introductions of today's group. I will first start off with myself. My name is Luna. I use she, her pronouns. And the question of the day is, what activities or hobbies have you gotten into while in quarantine? And for me, it has been watching anime.
Hey, what are you watching?
I'm watching Naruto and Full Metal Alchemist.
It's a good start. My name is Wale Akinlosotu. Um, Something I've gotten into, or he, him pronouns, and something I've gotten into is farming at Nurturing Roots and just helping helping out around that farm, which is a community farm if you're in the Seattle area. So if you want to volunteer, we have volunteer days on Thursdays and Sundays. So look them up.
Is there like
Yeah.
any specific like plants that you like farming?
No, not really. I was helping to build this like underground pizza oven type thing, which was pretty cool. But yeah, no specific plants yet that I like planting.
I went there one day because Wale invited me. I don't like doing gardening stuff, but it was really cute and I really enjoyed it. So recommend it for anyone who's listening. So my name is Iman. I use she, her pronouns. And something that I've been doing is probably baking again. Like Lona knows I can't cook or bake, but I really enjoy baking and I kind of got back into it with this whole quarantine situation. And we're about to be on lockdown again. So yikes. But anyways, just to let you guys know, this is going to be a recap of our last Black Dialogue conversation, just to give you guys an idea of what type of conversations we have and give you an idea more of what we do with Black Dialogue.
Yeah, and so before we jump in, kind of to make an understanding of the questions that we're going to be asking, um, the questions are from the previous dialogue, and we were talking about just kind of what's happening on the continent right now with a lot of civil unrest and uprising in different types of movements, as well as the rejection of human rights violations in those countries. And so we will just be covering those as much as possible from our knowledge, as well as just from what other people had said during that conversation. So without further ado, let's jump into our first question, which is, what is your vision for Africa?
Okay, I can go first if we're not having order, but I can keep it short. But basically, my vision for Africa is that it's peaceful. We're able to be fully independent without our resources being extracted. So, like being able to trade within Africa and build up our own economy. Because Africa has a lot of natural resources, but we always have not been the beneficiaries of it. And also just creating more unity across different African countries, kind of like how the EU is able. Someone was saying how in the EU, you're able to travel once you get into the any European country, basically. So kind of doing that with Africa, it would be easy to travel between countries, kind of building up that understanding of each other's cultures and understanding of like what each country has to offer. So yeah.
I would say for me, my vision is peace and like a reorganization of Africa, because we all know that. I mean, actually, in the beginning of the dialogue, we talked a lot about the balkanization of Africa and how in the Berlin Conference, and how things were split up in ways that weren't really conducive for life and the ethnic groups within those cutout those cutout lines. So it's really tough to see the wars and the ethnic violence that we see in throughout the country, and we know a lot of it is specifically because of how these countries were made up. So I would love to see a reorganization of Africa and reimagining what that looks like, and just peace throughout the land.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I think um, one of my biggest visions is a elimination of corruption, and that starts with devaluing the consequences of colonialism and actually breaking down the ways in which colonialism affected um, all the countries within Africa, and just how we can really separate ourselves from the rest of the structures that the rest of the world puts themselves in. And I think Africa has, the whole continent has a uniqueness in the way that we govern before colonialism, and I really would want to tie back into those roots of how we were able to do that without shit just going down the drain because of colonialism. So yeah, that's one of my visions. But with the next question, how has the current uprising of the African diaspora affected your community, and share how you have been processing?
Um, I can speak on this. So when we brought this up in our group, um, a lot of people brought up the fact that it's also like, in addition to what's happening on the continent with the uprisings, COVID has also made it harder for people to like feel a sense of community and kind of heal and go through what's happening on the continent with people that they love and trust here in Seattle, or in their homes, because they can't really interact with others. They can't interact with their community as much as they used to due to COVID. So um, that was interesting to hear, because we all know that a lot of this is happening because of COVID as well. It's creating like the conditions that are ripe for revolution and for unrest. So yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's tough because we just feel so disconnected from what's happening, and um, we can't go out into the streets as much as we would want. We can't be in contact with people on the ground as much as we want. So we're just kind of watching and feeling a bit helpless. So that was the overwhelming feeling that I had, and a lot of the people in my group shared as well.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I think a really big part is the lack of feeling like you can be involved. I think is really taking a toll on people. And also just feeling like we have limited access to information, right? So at the end of the day, this is currently happening in real time. So trying to get accurate information is really hard. And also just speaking to family members. So I feel like we're feeling disconnected here and back home because we want to at least, talk to each other here and be like, hey, I'm going through this. Like, I'm suffering, and I need your help and I need you to listen. But at the same time, you don't really have a grasp on what's going on. So I feel like for me personally, I feel a huge, like, I feel really stressed out because I don't fully understand what's going on. I just know it's bad. And then here, I can't really meet up with people that I would normally have these conversations with. Like, they have to be over the phone or over Zoom. And I think it takes more of an emotional toll on everyone because we don't get to fully process how we want to. And then I think it also affects us in ways that we don't think it does because we're not able to process it like we normally would. So I honestly feel like this time around, it's honestly worse and affecting a lot of us a lot more. But because of COVID and how we've been so, I guess, apart for so long from people, I think people are trying to like almost, I think people are almost, I don't want to say desensitized, but having a hard time coming through and showing their emotion or feeling like they can process their emotions because literally you can't kick it with anyone. Like you have to stay at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of going off of that, I think COVID, like you both said, are really huge impacts on the way that people are actually like interacting with what's going on. I think, with what was happening even in BLM, everyone was so knowledgeable of it because of the fact that no one was doing anything to just distract them from it.
Hmm.
And I think that's the same thing that's kind of happening now is like a lot of people that had probably, disassociated themselves from these issues before or pretended that they weren't happening and existed are now coming to this realization that they have to confront what's going on. And now a lot of people don't know how to deal with the fact that this has been happening for so long. And, for us, it's like, we know what getting change looks like, whereas in Africa it's a lot slower. And so I think for us it's like we're so disturbed that it's not coming as quick as we would think it should, and I think that's causing a lot of disruption in the way that people think
Hmm.
everything works, like in the whole world too, just like seeing things, and everyone's just getting really confused.
Yeah. We're also going through our own uprising here in the US. So um, yeah, we see how it works here, and it obviously is not going to be, it's not going to translate exactly to how it should work in Africa. But um, just speaking on that a bit, going through the uprising here and being involved with like organizations and the demands that we're trying to push forward, it's been super stressful. Like just going on social media when things really kicked off, um, you could just search and scroll, and it would just be like a never-ending list of doom and gloom. And the same thing would happen in Africa, and then it's just like back to back trauma that you have to experience like everywhere you look. It just feels like you're in a constant fight. Like if things start to slow down here, the next thing you know, there's a war in your country back home, and this place doesn't even feel like home, right? And so when you think of like settling down and going home, and then seeing that place that you think of in your mind on fire, and going through, you know, just going through the same things that you're seeing here in the US or worse, your sense of home just, I don't know, missing that sense of home really leaves you without a sense of peace internally. So that's a lot of how I've been feeling. It's just like back to back war wherever you look in both of your homes. So
And just also like kind of backing that up too, I think a lot of people are realizing that resolutions aren't happening, and people are really tired of resolutions not coming together, and that there's no peace here and there's no peace back home. And so
yeah,
when they're like having to marinate on the fact that you're not getting the peace that you've been advocating for so long and putting so much work into, and you see how many countless lives are being sacrificed for it, and then nothing happens, it's so disappointing, and it's like a very big leading cause for why a lot of people end up having to suffer from things like depression and suicide. And so I think it's really hard to just come from being disappointed in one country to seeing another disappointment happen in another country. So
yeah.
it, it's really deep. But yeah, so going on to question 3, does this feel any different from other uprisings in the past? If so, how?
I think the biggest difference for me is probably coverage, as like as little as that can sound. I feel like hearing about stuff that happened during our parents' generation just feels very far removed, and there isn't as much documentation of what happened until years later. So then we kind of get like, little snippets of what happened. I feel like based off of what they've been telling us and like what's happening now, I feel like the movement is so far and widespread, that it's just not one singular thing or one singular country that's experiencing something really big. It's like everyone's kind of experiencing at the same time. So it's like it's gonna be kind of crazy if that many countries are being ignored. You know, it's like it's not just one country where they can try to brush it off. So I think it is a lot bigger in that sense, that we're all going through something in America. The continent is also suffering. And so it's like this big, wide understanding of how everyone is being affected in different ways. And I think that's opening a lot of people's eyes up to things that we probably wouldn't have seen before, because honestly, I feel like Africa has been silently bleeding for a lot at the time, but because we don't get coverage on it, like we kind of can distance ourselves from what's happening. We can be like, oh, did you hear about this one thing? And then it's kind of like, you know, Africa's fine, because we don't live there and we don't see it and we don't know what's happening. Versus like here, we have phones, we see the news, we see social media. It's like, boom, something happens. We're totally tuned in. And I think, like Ale was saying earlier, about having information on both ends has been really draining, but also showing me that there's a lot going on in both spaces that we need to take account for. But obviously, it can get really tiring and really disappointing when you feel like the one place that is supposed to be your home. Like for me, I find peace in knowing that I could go back to Ethiopia one day. Like that's going to be my real home, or that I could have a sense of peace there. But seeing that there's no peace there, and you know, America obviously doesn't want me here. I was displaced here and never will probably feel like home here. It's like, dang, I have nowhere to feel that sense of peace. So I think we have to just remind ourselves how important it is that there is coverage and that there is awareness building, but what can we do with the momentum? That's kind of what I think about, like, how long will this last?
Yeah, I could just kind of go on with that too. And like, I think people are starting to see parallels and between like their their the country that they live in and obviously like the continent, and how a lot of these issues can't just be excusable anymore. I think many of us have been problematic enough to say, well, it's Africa and it's a third world country and it just happens there because it happens there. And, you know, now we're really starting to become more educated on the fact that these things shouldn't be normalized, and the fact that we do normalize it because it's Africa is wrong, and that the continent very much has the ability to change, and that comes from people actually speaking out against what's happening. And I think a lot of people are actually interacting a lot more with what's happening out there, and from like here and in the country. I think there's a lot more people, you know, uprising about what's actually happening in their respective countries within Africa. And, you know, before it was like just stay silent and deal with it, but now people are really starting to get fed up. And it's disappointing to know that people are being killed, but it's very interesting to see that new type of perspective that is happening that a lot of our generations have not really seen.
Yeah, and I feel like the biggest difference that I'm seeing right now is the fact that we're all in a pandemic and there's not really an end to the pandemic in sight. So, like I was saying before, our group talked about how this pandemic has made the situation in a lot of countries, including the U.S., ripe for revolution and these uprisings. And like here in the U.S. in Seattle, we've seen protests every single day for the last like 150 plus days. That's something I've never seen before, and it doesn't feel like, you know, the energy is gone or going anywhere. It's even though it's not as exciting and robust as it was a couple months ago. You can still feel the energy from the uprising. And I think it's the same in a lot of other countries. Like this isn't a time where, you know, this isn't a time where this or like things will dissipate and will go back to normal. I think youth are finally waking up and like really willing to put in whatever it takes to make the changes that they want to see in their countries. And the pandemic has kind of shown us that it has shown us like what's important and what's really not working in our societies, from the government to how we treat each other in our communities. And so, yeah, I think I'm just looking forward to capitalizing off of this energy and like really transferring it into the right areas, into organizing that has been happening before all of the uprisings happened. And I'm excited for that here in the US, but it's also really exciting to see in my home country of Nigeria, where as someone from the diaspora, I want to help build my country back home. But it's hard to find like-minded individuals or like movements that you can plug into or that, you know, align with your values. But right now it's clear, like, and I think a lot more people are waking up and being involved in their communities, and it makes it easier for the diaspora to identify where to put their time and energy, money, and resources to help build their country from outside of the country.
Awesome. So the next set of questions, how do these, excuse me, conflicts affect how you relate with your country?
I think it just creates like this mixed legacy of trying to understand yourself more, because I feel like at the end of the day, like we all came to America with the hopes of, building a new life, and we still have our identities instilled in us, but there's still a part of you that feels like an outsider because you never got to fully experience your culture firsthand. It's always like stories or, learning your native tongue at home, or, the elders telling you about like this is the culture and this is the history. And so I feel like hearing about I guess, the harder sides of our history, which is the bad stuff and how the corruption can negatively affect us, I think it creates this mixed legacy of trying not to always feel like you always have to know only the good stuff, right? It's important to know the bad stuff and like what can you do with that history to change it for the future? Because clearly it wasn't looking good, it's not looking good now, and what can you do to change it for the future? So I think for me, it's taught me a lot more about myself and understanding where I come from and what my roots are. And it's, I think for some people it can be disheartening to hear about those those tragedies, but I think it's important and it's necessary because at the end of the day, we're not going to get the liberation we want if we don't know all parts of our history. And so I feel like we were given the grace of being able to ignore certain parts of our history. But now it's like you can't do that. Like you just have to dive in and understand where you're coming from, what was really going wrong, and why it's still wrong, and how can we fix it. And so I think it takes an emotional toll on you because sometimes you could feel like do I come from bad people or do I come from a bad place? But really it's like they're individual leaders and people who made decisions prior to your time. But what do you do with that information now? Do you sit on it, or do you take that and you run with it and you're like, okay, I'm aware of this, I'm conscious of this. How do I change what's going on right now?
Mhm.
I can just kind of go off of how I felt a lot more reassured. I think these conflicts really brought out the diaspora here and the issues that we deal with individually on trying to figure out where we fit in, on who we advocate for. And I think a lot of us have come to this realization that we can advocate for both our home countries as well as the countries that we live in, and we don't have to choose a side. And that was something I think a lot of us were battling for so long, and we have really started to come together and come to this consensus of like we don't have to strip one identity to benefit another. And so that's, I think, that has brought me closer to a lot of the things that are happening in my home country, and that the fact that I don't have to feel uncomfortable speaking about what's happening back home, because I know at the end of the day, like that is, I have every right as, you know, who I am to speak on those issues. And then I have very much as well have the same right to speak about what's happening here because I lived through those same systems. So it's just a really interesting thing we've all kind of just started coming to our senses about, and it's really starting to shift the way in which we speak about things and not tiptoeing around, oh, well, I just don't know. It's like, okay, we're actually choosing to learn about these things because we know this is our issue as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, these conflicts kind of, like I was saying before, have affected my peace in like what I call home, which is back home in Nigeria. Um, so it's hard to see, but there is like hope in the conflicts that we're seeing. Just because when I look at who's leading the uprisings, um, the tactics that they're using, and the passion behind the change or the actions that they're taking to make change, it gives me hope for a better Nigeria. It gives me hope for um, the next round of leaders that are stepping up to the plate. So um, although it's hard to see, I feel like I have more hope in a better Nigeria. I feel like I now have comrades that I can link up with and support, and I, that's also a positive that has come from all of the uprisings that I've seen. A highlight of what's happening in the government and what's wrong, and then the leader is stepping up to make those solutions happen.
Yeah. The next question is, how do you see BLM playing a part in African movements, especially over social media? I can just kind of go into this real quickly. I've noticed a surge in people starting to use the hashtag recently. And I think that's because a lot of people felt like it was very much secluded just to the United States, and that what people who live in the United States experience is unique and does not happen in other countries. And I think a lot of people at first were very hesitant to use that hashtag because it very much centered around what was happening in the US. But then you started seeing a trickle of the same things happening in other countries that just weren't being spoken about. And so you have police brutality happening in all over Europe against Black people. And then you go and you look into, the continent, and you see a lot of people experiencing that very same thing. And then you go and you look into South America, for example, and you see the exact same thing. And I think a lot of us were just so hesitant to use that hashtag in the beginning because we didn't know if that was a universal hashtag or if it was just a US hashtag. And I think that movement is very much so something that, like the whole international community can use and not have to feel like they are not included in it, because that very much so includes everyone that is Black.
Yeah.
I think it just creates unity that wasn't there before, or like you said before, like drawing parallels that weren't seen before. I think we always have, like, at least for myself, I've always been trying to piece together the issues that go on here and outside of the country, just because we all end up in different places, but we're all still Black at the end of the day, and trying to understand how that all affects us. But I think now that people are kind of seeing that, hey, these are not completely different issues. In fact, they're very much similar. It's just that the people implementing them are different. I think it makes more awareness for understanding what Black liberation looks like globally and not just in the States, which I feel like before I had to pick which liberation fight I was fighting for, whether it's for the liberation of all Black people globally or just here because of like where I'm at. But at the end of the day, I feel like now we don't have to make that distinction or that choice. It's like at the end of the day, we're fighting for everyone, regardless of where I ended up at. So it doesn't matter where I am as long as I know that I'm trying to, shed light on everything. And it's also cool to see that people are like more engaged with those hashtags. Before, I feel like people would do it and people would just kind of like ignore it or not really see it to be as important. But I feel like now it's like making a lot of social media presence and people are actually acknowledging it. So I think that's dope.
Yeah. I thought it was cool how I talked with a friend in Brazil, and this was like in March, May or June. And they were just letting me know about how he and his friends in Brazil were looking at the uprising in the US and were getting inspired and watching and learning what we were doing um, for their movements and for their work in Brazil. And I think it goes to show just how influential the African diaspora in the US is, how influential Black people are in the US, and um, and how our fight resonates with the rest of the world. So it's good to see like the BLM hashtag and movement spread from just the US. But even happening, we even see protests in Nigeria, Ghana, um, other parts of Africa for BLM and addressing the issues that are happening in the US, but also in their hometowns and throughout the diaspora. So I feel like unintentionally the hashtag became a Pan-African movement. Um, I wouldn't say the organization is, but that's a whole another story. But the movement itself and it resonates throughout the diaspora, and that's been beautiful to see.
Yeah, I agree. So the last question is, what are some key differences and similarities you've noticed in current US movements versus movements throughout the diaspora? What can these movements learn from each other?
I feel like we are really organized here in the US when it comes to when it comes to the uprising. I would say we're organized in the sense that we have like demands. We have very clear demands that like 90% of people can get behind. And there's a lot of movements and figures that we can look back on within our history to learn from. Um, although our history has been kind of suppressed and it's not taught in public schools, we have to wait till we get into college to learn the truth about like Christopher Columbus and like all these other parts of US history. But there's like a growing sense of responsibility within our communities to educate ourselves, and we're able to just learn about key figures and their movements from the past. And I feel like a lot of individuals now incorporate that into the organizing that they do. So yeah, there's like a sense of organization that I feel like uh, could be shared and that other uprisings can learn from.
Going off of that, I feel like it gives us a space of understanding of where we're starting from. Because sometimes it can feel like we're starting from zero, but really it's like, no, we're starting from where our ancestors left off. We're just trying to pick it up. So I
Mhm.
think that self education gives us a kind of understanding of, okay, this is where we need to go. This is where our moral compass needs to be at as we navigate organizing. And so I've seen that a lot of us are making that effort to like read or speak to people that have that firsthand experience, or just make sure that we're not just going off of our emotion, because emotion is important because we're all emotionally connected to the movements that we're a part of. But I think there's been a huge push for self-education and creating access to understanding our own Black history, or just the systems that work in America and like why they are the way they are. And I love that because I feel like I'm learning a lot more as I'm organizing in these or supporting these organizing spaces, and I don't feel like I'm just going there just to do one little thing and leave. It's like, no, let's grow. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think people are going to leave those organizing spaces, or once, hopefully we do get what we want, not feeling like they were just there to, push some type of agenda. It's like, I'm actually growing as an individual, which I think is really dope.
Mhm.
Yeah. I can just speak on a similarity and a difference. For me, I think a similarity between both movements is the fact that both movements are starting to realize that without dismantling structural like racism and without deconstructing, the corruption and supremacy in which a lot of our governments stand on, there won't be any actual like huge change being able to be effective. And so a lot of people are starting to realize it's dismantling the system. That's something that's a reoccurring issue, and that, you know, it's not just everyone going crazy at each other, and that's how we're going to solve things. It's like we actually have to talk about the structural issues that are going on. And I'm really happy because a lot of times in, you know, in Africa, they're not talking about these things within each country and how structural things actually affect, you know, why a lot of people are going through stuff. And that it's, they think it's just one president and, or, you know, one dictator, and that when they get out of power, everything will go back to normal. And it's like, no, it's a structural issue. So I'm really glad people are starting to realize that. One difference I would say, though, is that there is a lack of acknowledgement of the fact that a lot of people within the continent cannot be as educated or as outspoken as people here. And a lot of times you'll hear people think that, you know, why aren't people in Africa uprising in the same way that we do? Why aren't they speaking about these topics? Why, you know, why aren't they overthrowing their governments? And it's like, okay, well, and to some extent, we have protection in the way that we can protest, and that we won't just be thrown or shot at every single protest. Like, this is just a new thing now that's happening for us recently, and, you know, actually seeing that cops are okay with shooting us at protests. You know, that used to be a hidden thing very much in the United States. But, you know, back in the continent, they have very much condemned any type of protesting. So people are scared as shit to even go outside and say that they have an opinion. And that was like my big thing, was a lot of diaspora had to really come to terms that we're not at the same playing field when it comes to that, because we're able to speak about certain things and not have to deal with a huge repercussion. But if they just leave their house and say a single word, there's 10 times more repercussion for that. So I'm just, that's the similarity and differences that I see.
Yeah. Yeah, just access to social media and yeah, access to social media, internet in general, and being able to share what's happening on the ground is like, that's what's fueling the uprising here, because we're like constantly flooded with what the police are doing, stories of like what white supremacist groups are doing. And so it's like constantly keeping people in the know of what's going on, informed, on their toes. It's helping people be safe. But on the ground in some of these countries in Africa, you know, that's like the first thing that they do before, you know, an uprising. They cut off the internet, cut off access to social media. And if there is access, then it's like highly monitored. So, you know, you will get in trouble for using it to say anything about the government. So yeah, I see that as a huge difference. And it probably really does affect how the movement can be organized, because I know it helps us. Well, there's also like downsides to it, but for the most part, I feel like it helps us stay organized and be on the same page about like what our demands are. But when you don't have that, you have to find alternatives. So
Yeah. But with that being said, is there any last comments before we close?
I did want to bring up the fact that like before all of our dialogues, we ground the discussion in history and education, so that we're not just, you know, having discussions about things that or like restarting the conversation and having discussions based on our own knowledge, our personal knowledge, but we all have an understanding of general like facts and history that can help show us like what's causing a lot of the issues that we see in Africa. And I wanted to know if you guys had anything that you wanted to like highlight that kind of ties this together. Well, that ties together the conflicts that we're seeing right now.
I don't know if this will fully answer the question, but I'm gonna try to connect it more to Black dialogue and like the space that we have. But I think understanding Pan-Africanism and how important it is has given voice to people that would normally not be in those spaces or feel like they can bring their full self to a conversation. So I think that itself, I think, creates space for a lot more meaningful dialogue that isn't surface level,
Mhm.
which I think gets to the, the root of like how we want to do things and how we want to make sure our movements are fully encompassing of everyone, which I think normally it would just be, a couple people who have already organized or been in the organizing space kind of just running with what they know, which isn't completely bad because they have a historical understanding of what's wrong in this country. But I think now there's more involvement from everyone in the community, or at least they want to listen or they want to come to these spaces and share their opinion or gain knowledge. And so I think it creates more of a sense of unity between everyone instead of feeling like, oh, I'm not educated enough on this, therefore I can't say anything. And I think that has been eliminated. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but personally for myself, I feel like a lot of people have been feeling like they can be involved, which I think is important.
Yeah. I can just kind of also go on the fact that I think Black dialogues give us space for people to actually find resolutions and not just sit and argue about something all day. I think a lot of the spaces in which we talk about politics from our respective countries usually involve people speaking on their personal experiences and how they see the future of the continent and the country. And then, you know, it then just goes into this whole argument of, well, whose idea is better and who has the best vision for their country. And it's like, that's not how resolutions happen. It's, a collective group effort that we, as in like the whole diaspora and the country itself, has to come to terms and want. And so having a space where we can just talk about that and not have to feel like we have to be on edge and defend ourselves and
Mhm.
defend the experiences that we have, but instead just talking on facts and having that education beforehand really gives people some type of um, foundation of how their conversations can start. And it 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 allows people who have maybe not had those conversations, like Iman said, to
Mhm.
people who are having those conversations, and it brings both groups together to really actually start thinking about good solutions, like solutions that will work long term.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Um, I also wanted to share that if you want to stay in the loop and be a part of the next dialogue, just see what else the coalition of organizations are up to outside of just the dialogues, you should join the Align and Build network, which is hosted on Slack. And we'll put the link somewhere where you can find it. But yeah, thank you for listening. Also, I'm a guest. I feel like I'm a guest right now because the two girls that I'm with here have a podcast that you guys should all tune into. You guys put out episodes like once a week too, right?
We're trying to be consistent, yes, sir.
I know.
We're trying to fight the revolution and be consistent. We're trying both. But
Okay.
yeah.
What's the name of the podcast?
Okay, I'll do it since Lona's going through it. Our our podcast is Keeping It Real with Mani and Lani, and we basically talk about these things from our perspective as like Black women. I mean, historically, we just don't see a lot of the stuff that we talk about between ourselves being highlighted on platforms. So we're like, okay, there's definitely other people who are feeling what we're feeling and just want to highlight these important issues, but also just keep it lighthearted and just speak from our true, authentic, feeling. We're not trying to sugarcoat anything. We're just, yeah, that's kind of like the point.
Dope. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But without further ado, thank you for listening to this episode with us. We hope to come back to y'all with more recaps of the conversations, and we actually hope to see more faces in our dialogue sessions. So thank you all so much for joining, and have a lovely day.
Peace.
Peace.